Okay, you can go ahead and swear her in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Ma'am, would you please state your name for the record?
Tammy Driver.
And Mr. Driver, let's talk a little bit about the process here. Have you ever been deposed?
No.
Okay. I'm going to give you a few ground rules for the benefit of the court reporter and for the attorneys here. If at any time I ask you a question that you feel is just downright confusing and you don't understand it, please stop me and ask me to rephrase that question. Otherwise, if you answer it, we will all assume you understood the question. Is that agreeable?
Yes.
Yeses and nos are really good for the court reporter and for the lawyers. What we try to avoid and ask the deponent to avoid is or shaking your head, because the court reporter can't take down that you're shaking your head. And and we're not sure if those are yeses or nos. Is that agreeable?
Yes.
If you feel like you need to answer a question with a yes or no, but in doing so, it doesn't come out quite right, your answer, you can go ahead and explain it. Is that understood?
Yes.
How long have you worked for the Pinells County Sheriff's Office?
21 years and 11 months.
And prior to working for the Pinells County Sheriff's Office, what did you do?
I worked at a restaurant.
And when you started off at the Sheriff's Department, what department were you in back some 21, almost 22 years ago?
No, I said 29 years.
29, I'm sorry, 29 and 11 months?
Yes.
And when you started 29, almost 30 years ago, what department did they start you in?
Fiscal.
And after fiscal, where did you go?
To records.
And how long were you in records?
20 years.
So you were in fiscal almost 10 years, approximately?
About 8 years.
And currently, what position are you at the Sheriff's Department?
Commissary inmate welfare.
When did you move out of records and go into commissary inmate welfare?
September of 2017.
And what were the circumstances regarding you moving into the commissary inmate welfare section?
Needed a change. It's two different departments though.
What do you mean
Okay.
by that?
Okay, you saying records and then there's public records.
Okay, let's take a step back.
Okay.
When did you start in public records?
Not sure the exact time, but I think it was in 2014 or 2013.
And when did you leave public records?
September of 2017.
Now, you were in records prior to that then, you said, right?
Yes.
Okay, what did you do in records? Not public records, but the records.
Background checks, reports, answer the phones, assist citizens that came to the front desk. Other various duties. It's been a while since I was in records.
Now, when you left the public records division of the department, was that your choice or were you told you had to go into a different section?
My choice.
And you said you needed a change. Why did you need a change?
Been in there for a few years and I want to do something different.
Now, when you were working in the public records department, what was your, were you paid hourly or is it salary?
Salary.
And what was your salary?
Actually, I'm not sure how they categorize that. It may be hourly. I'm just give you the amount. I'm not sure how they.
Sure.
You want the hourly rate or the?
Both, if you know them.
Actually, I don't forgot what hourly rate, but but the annual, I think it was like 46,000.
Now, in the Public Records Department, can an individual that is hired on by the Sheriff's Department, can they start as a beginner in public records?
As far as I know, I don't know HR's, policy. I don't know.
Did you ever see anybody start off at the at the Sheriff's Department in public records right off the bat?
I don't understand what you mean right off the bat.
Meaning, if I go apply for a job with the Sheriff's Department and they hire me and they put me right into public records,
Oh,
do they do that?
yes.
And do you know what the starting salary currently is for that position?
Object the form.
You can
No,
answer
I
the
don't.
question. Okay. Now, when you were in public records, what was your job description? What were your duties?
Fulfilling public records requests, handling subpoenas, answering their phones.
Okay, now what kind of training did you get through the Sheriff's Department with regards to fulfilling public records requests and taking those requests?
Mainly my training, because I had been in records for 20 years, close to 20 years, I think it was 18, 19 or 20 years. I didn't get a whole lot of training when I went into public records other than learning how to set up the different various files and just the different correspondence that we used in public records.
Okay, so give me an example. Assuming I send in a public records request, walk me through what you would do with it.
Depends on how you sent it in.
Let's say it's email.
Okay. We would, first of all, it's been a while since I've been there, and I'm trying to think of memory what we did. Once I received public records request from email, we would send it to either the supervisor or the public records mailbox.
Okay, now who was your supervisor during your tenure in public records?
We had several.
And who were they?
The last one I had was Napier, Lieutenant Napier. Then for her was Jennifer Kovac, I think that's her last name. And then had Molly Taffy. And then, and that was it, yeah.
So if you received a request from me and you either sent it to the supervisor or in the box, what is the box that you?
The public records box, mailbox.
Okay, is that a physical mailbox or is that an email type?
Email.
And what would be the purpose of sending it to the box versus your supervisor? When would you do the one versus the other?
Like I said, I can't remember which one I did at the time. The purpose was to get it assigned to us, because we would get a lot of emails from everywhere, and to keep so they know who's working on what request. It would get sent to, I think it to the public records box, or either, because at time we did both. Sometimes we would do it to the supervisor, or we would send it to the box, the mailbox, and then the supervisor will assign it back to one of the team members.
So you could, in theory, get a public records request in via email, and you're not the one who's going to handle it because
Right.
it will be sorted out later on. Is that
Yes.
accurate? Okay. Do you know, as far as the amounts that are charged for the public records, the hourly fees, how those were established when you were in the public records department?
No, I don't know how they were established. I just knew the rate at the time and what we did, the procedure.
And what was the rate when you were there in that department?
It was $17.47 an hour, and then it went up $22.70 an hour.
And do you recall there was like a free time period that was given where there was no charge, what it was when you were in public records?
When I started, it was an hour. And
Did-
then,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
yeah, when I started, it was an hour.
And did that change at any point in time?
Yes,
When did that change, if you know?
I don't remember the time.
And do you know who made that change?
No, our supervisor at the time told us. I don't remember who made the change.
Were you involved in any of the meetings when the change was discussed?
No,
And do you recall who your supervisor was that told you that it had been changed?
Lieutenant Napier.
Now, I want to go back to the supervisor versus the
Oh,
boss. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay, go ahead.
I think it was Jennifer Kovac. I think it was her during her time period.
And was there a memo regarding that, or was it just verbally told to you?
I don't remember a memo. I remember it verbally, but it could have been a memo, but I just don't remember.
And I want to go back to the supervisor versus the box. Did you make the determination when you would put it in the box versus the supervisor?
Like I said, we had several supervisors at the time, and I can't remember at which supervisor wanted straight to the box or which one wanted straight sent to her, because we have done both.
Was there ever a time that you were told certain emails from certain entities or people would go to the supervisor and not in the box?
No,
So after you give it to the box or the supervisor, assuming it came back to you, what would happen next?
do acknowledgement,
What is that?
just acknowledgement, acknowledging the request, send an email to the requester that we received the request according to Florida State Statute 119. Like I said, it's been a while since.
Sure.
Uh,
So you're sending an email back to the person who made the request saying, we've received it and we'll look into it, or something along those lines?
yes.
Okay, so after you send the acknowledgement email, what is the next step?
To set up the files in our Rocky system.
The Rocky system?
Just an internal, I'm not sure we even still have it, but it was just an internal filing system that we use to set up files, to gather documents.
Are those done on the computer, I take it?
Yes,
Okay, so you would then open a file and it's called Rocky, you said?
yes.
So once the file's opened in Rocky, what happens next with that file?
We will label, we'll make 3 files within that one file, for correspondence, records, responsive, and I think there was a third, I can't remember the third file.
And who has access to Rocky?
Like I said, I'm not sure we even still have that system.
Do you recall when you first started using the system named Rocky?
When I went into public records,
That would have been 2013, I think you said?
yes.
When you left, were you still using Rocky?
A little bit, yes, but it's, yes, yeah.
Was there something else that they were trying to implement before you left the public records department?
Yes.
Okay, what was that?
Not sure the exact name, but I think it was called Gov, Q, and A.
Was that the automated system online?
I think so. Like I say, I had already left before it was implemented, so I don't know much about it.
And do you know why the system was called Rocky? where that
No.
came from?
No.
So after these files are opened up in Rocky, and you said there were 3 of them?
3 or 4, like I said, I don't remember.
Sure.
Yeah.
What happens next in the public records process for that particular request?
There was a file that we put all the correspondence from the requester and the correspondence that we send the requester back out.
Was there an actual manual for this Rocky system that you had? Meaning some sort of pamphlet or directions online?
Not that I know of. I have never seen it.
So how did you learn to use Rocky?
By my supervisor at the time.
And they never gave you any pamphlets or anything like that?
No.
Okay, so what would be the next step in the process we're discussing with public records?
To gather the records.
And who would be required to gather the records?
The person who's assigned to.
So it would be you if it was assigned to you?
Yes.
And where do you go looking for the records that are requested? Is there some sort of database?
It depends on what the requester is requesting.
Okay, for instance, police reports, if they're requesting those.
Right. They will go, well, it depends on what type of police reports also.
What different types of police reports are there?
I don't know because it's several, but ACES is the main one. We're going to ACES and pull reports.
Do you recall going into another system to pull reports?
The CAD.
Okay. Any other system?
Viper.
Anything else you can think of, system-wise?
For reports, for arrest reports, right? That's what you're asking?
Yes.
I think that would be it.
Now, when you would go into ACES, would there ever be instructions or alerts that would come up when you tried to pull a particular report up?
Not alert, but it will indicate the report is open or not approved.
And if it's open, what do you do if somebody's requested that particular report?
Depends on what type of report it is.
Give me some examples.
If it's an arrest report and if they're requesting a copy of it, and then again, it depends what type of arrest. It's not like a clear-cut answer to that question. Say if it's trespassing, and it's open, they can get a cover sheet of the report, but no narrative. If it's that person, the suspect who's requesting it, with ID, they can, get the cover sheet. But anybody else won't be allowed to get a copy of it because it's still open.
And is the reporting officer the only one that has the ability to change the status of the report from open to closed? Who can do that?
I don't.
Objective form.
That's okay, you could answer it.
I don't know that.
What about if somebody's requesting IA's, internal affairs? How would you go about obtaining that?
Send a request to our contact person, IA,
And who was that when you were there?
Karen McLaughlin.
McLaughlin?
Yes.
And when you send a request to her, would you actually send the actual public records request from the individual, or is this your own request?
No, it'll be attached, the request from the requester.
It will be attached?
Yes.
Have you had a situation during your tenure in the Public Records Department where somebody requested all investigative reports regarding a deputy and they were given a printout of various cases but not the actual investigative reports such as the IA?
I don't know. Can't remember.
So would it be Internal Affairs, Karen McLaughlin, who would then provide you what she believed was needed in that public records?
If they're asking for an IA report, sometimes they ask for just a summary of that employee. So it depends on what the requester is asking, and if the cases are open or closed.
On the internal affairs stuff that's closed,
Mm-hmm.
would you consider that investigative reports when you were in the public records department?
That's not my decision to make.
Who makes that? Karen McLaughlin?
It would it would depends on what the requester is asking, and if the case was open or closed. I would go to my supervisor and ask her, you know, am I sending the requester? Send this request to the right person. If they're asking for investigative reports, then that would seem like a report will come from a detective or a deputy.
What about if there was a request for complaints of a deputy? Where would you go requesting that type of documentation? Who
That would
you
be
go to?
from IA.
Now, if the requester did not specifically ask for a summary, would the whole IA be provided, or would just the summary be provided?
Objective form.
You can answer that.
We were usually at the time we'll get a page count from Karen. Most of those IA reports are very lengthy. They're hundreds, thousands of pages long, and she will send us a number of how many pages the report is, say like 1,000 pages, and then we'll go from there.
As far as doing what?
Well, the requester will have to pay a deposit in order to obtain that large amount of a report.
Okay, let me ask you this. With regards to the deposit, who determines what the estimated fee would be in order for those records to be obtained by the requester?
I don't know who determines that, but we had some guidelines that we used.
Are those written guidelines?
Yes,
Do you know what they were called specifically?
they will be in our policy and procedures for public records.
Okay, and were you required to do the estimates, or did somebody else provide that to you?
It depends. If, like Karen said, there's 1,000 pages in this report, and I would go and do an estimate based on the procedures that we used at the time.
Now, if there needs to be redactions, how would you estimate redaction time?
Well, it's hard to do that. That's why we kind of basically, it's an estimate on the number of pages, and we just estimate that, and then when we actually do the work, then we, to keep track of the time.
So, where are the guidelines based on the estimates for redaction time? Where would we find those?
They should be in the policy and procedure. It's kind of hard to, because I don't remember everything that's written in there without looking at it, but we estimate 100 pages per hour.
That you would be able to read through 100 pages per hour, or that
And I think that,
individual?
yeah.
And when, did you actually ever do any redactions yourself?
Yes.
How would you keep track of your time when you did redactions?
Write it down.
For instance, give us an example. You have a 100-page document in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do? You've reviewed it,
review it, have like a notepad beside me and, go page by page and write down how many minutes or, that I worked on each page and
And does-
calculate it up
Does that occur before the person's made the payment on the estimate or only after?
after.
And your notes, were you required to keep your notes of the time you took?
No,
Were those typed up or put in a computer? How was a record kept of that?
there is no record of that. We would just do an estimate, from our calculations and put it on the, either type it up in the memo when we send out the request for deposit or on the call sheet.
Okay, let's go to now somebody's paid that deposit. When you were actually doing the redactions, was there a record kept of how much time you spent?
Not a personal record. It would be on the document that I sent to the requester. The request for a deposit and the call sheet.
No, I'm talking about after. Let me give you an example. I make a public records request. You've done the estimate. I now pay the estimate. Then you actually sit down, is my understanding, and do the redactions, read everything. I'm talking about that time period. Who keeps track of that time period, of the actual time it would have taken you to redact documents and read them?
The person who's working on that project,
Okay,
or the requester, on the request.
and where would you keep those records if you were working on it? Meaning, I just sat down, I spent 5 hours redacting. Where are those records kept?
There are no, it would just be on like a notepad.
So you keep like a total of everything you've done?
No, I don't.
Okay, so it's on the notepad.
Right.
When does that then go on the invoice, an itemized invoice to the requester after you've done everything?
When I finish the project or the request.
And the notes, were you required to keep those?
No,
Were there any directions or policies with regards to the notes?
no,
Did anybody ever tell you to keep the notes?
no,
Did anybody ever tell you to discard the notes?
no.
How often in your experience and training in public records would the time that you estimate be pretty much right on point, where you didn't have to give any money back or you didn't have to request any more money from the requester?
I don't know.
Were there times that you had to ask for more money from the requester after you've completed the public records evaluation and redaction?
Yes, there were times.
Were there times when you gave money back to the requester because the estimate was over what it took?
I don't remember.
How could I find records where that would have occurred? What would I ask for?
Making a public records request?
If I wanted documentation where,
I can't tell you how to write your request. So,
is there some language I would need to use to put in that request?
then again, I can't tell you how would you, request something.
So
That was something that you will have to come up with.
So do you recall ever sending somebody a rebate for time that was not used yet it was billed?
I don't remember. It could have been, but I don't remember.
And would that have been done in a letter with an itemized invoice? What's the process of returning monies to somebody on an estimate that was basically, I'll use the word overbilled because you didn't use all the time up?
I don't remember ever doing that, so I don't remember ever returning any monies.
Would that be required to come from you or somebody else's supervisor if there was a rebate, basically, where monies were returned?
Yes, it would come from a supervisor because we will have to, contact, our fiscal department to issue a check. And that's from the supervisor.
In your time with the Public Records Department, were there entities like the media or any individuals who were not charged to obtain records?
The media, and government agencies and other law enforcement agencies.
And do you know why the media would not have been charged, and did that policy eventually change?
I don't know, who it came from,
What do you mean, who it came
the
from?
policy, why they was or were not charged.
The whole time when you were in the Public Records Department, was the media not charged, or did there come a time where they were charged?
When I was there, they were not charged.
Did you ever contact the fiscal department in order to get a refund for any requester during your tenure in the Public Records Department?
I don't remember doing that.
If you had an issue in understanding one of the public records requests, would that then go to your supervisor for explanation?
Yes.
Did your department have any meetings, and how many people were in the department for the public records, first of all, while you were there?
Let me see. Total of 6.
Were there any joint meetings with everybody?
Yes.
At any time, were there any meetings regarding Mr. James McLinnis?
No. Joint meetings, no.
Okay, what about individual meetings with you and the supervisor or anybody in the department regarding James McLinnis?
More like, how to handle the request, gathering up information.
And why was Mr. McLinnis singled out?
He wasn't singled out, it was just like if I had a question about his request.
Was there ever a time that Mr. McLinnis's name was singled out to you by a supervisor?
I don't understand what you mean by single out.
Meaning a supervisor came to you with instructions saying, Mr. McLinnis has made requests and this is the way we're gonna handle them.
They were handled, like other requests. There was no different procedure.
What do you, go ahead, I'm sorry, ma'am.
Just corresponding, gathering up the records.
Was there ever a time where you would send an email, here's another one from James McLinnis, to your supervisor?
Forward to my supervisor. Forward the request to my supervisor.
And would you do that for other individuals that have done multiple requests, saying here's another request from Joe Public?
Could have, I don't know.
So is it your testimony there was not a different procedure with Mr. McLinnis when he made requests versus just somebody in the public making a request? Or were there?
He had a lot of requests, but the procedure is still the same. Do acknowledgement, gathering up the records. I mean, there's no other different procedure. You still have to fulfill the request to the best of our knowledge.
Did you have to take those to the supervisor, meaning Mr. McLinnis's request, versus just putting them in the box?
No, they were all, because they were electronic, so they would be sent to the supervisor or either to the public records box.
The next question I know you're gonna have to guess on, and that's fine. I'm not gonna hold you to that number, but do you know how many records that you did during the requests that you handled during your tenure in the Public Records Department that required a fee?
No, I don't know. I have no idea.
Do you know what percentage maybe required a fee?
About 75%, if I would have to guess.
Required a fee?
It may be wrong, accurate number, I mean, it may not be an accurate number, but I'm just guessing 75, 85%. I don't know.
Were there ever any discussions about James McLinnis within the department that you were privy to?
Yes,
What were those discussions about?
how to proceed with the request.
Did that happen on all cases or just Mr. McLinnis's?
Combination,
And who would you go to, or who would come to you with regards to instructions on Mr. McLinnis's public records requests?
my supervisor at the time.
Did you have to take every single one of his requests and go through a supervisor?
Like I said before, his requests, his and all other requests are sent to the supervisor or to the public records box, and then get assigned back to one of the clerks, specialists. So the supervisor see all the requests anyway, cause she has to assign them.
Were there ever any derogatory statements within the department that you're aware of made about Mr. James McLinnis?
No,
Was there ever any discussion about him at the front desk with his picture on a piece of paper?
I don't know about that.
Were you ever at the front desk when Mr. McLinnis had come in?
No,
Not at any time?
not that I remember. I mean, we being in, no, not that I remember.
Was there a set policy and procedure? Did you ever see anything in writing, or was it done verbally to you on how to handle Mr. McLinnis's requests?
No,
Did Sheriff Gualtieri ever have any discussions with you concerning Mr. McLinnis's requests?
no,
I noticed on some of the emails, they would be signed electronically or just in type Sheriff Gualtieri or something along those lines. Are those actually responded by him, or is that your department responding and it just has his name on the bottom?
you mean, an email from public records?
Yes.
It's probably just our standard, form letter.
Did you have any dealings with Sean Joel?
Yes,
Was there any discussion about Mr. McLinnis with Mr. Joel at any time?
not that I remember.
When would Sean Joel get involved with you in your job duties?
He
While
wa-
in public records, obviously.
Yeah, he was our supervisor, while I was there for a very brief amount of time. I don't remember him telling me anything about Mr. McLinnis.
Were you ever advised that Mr. McLinnis was prohibited from coming back into the copy section of the Public Records Department?
No citizens are allowed back in the public records.
Was there, at the window, were you ever advised that he wasn't even allowed to come up to the window?
No,
And how many times would you say you had gone to the window or been there of the Public Records Department?
I can't give you a number for public records. I can't give you a number, how many times I help customers.
We talking thousands, hundreds?
Reject a form.
You can answer that.
No idea, I don't know.
Do you ever recall seeing Mr. McLinnis's Florida DHSMV information up on the wall by the window stating this subject is not to leave the lobby area per Major Joel, January 8th, 2013?
No.
Do you know how many records requests you would handle in a week, approximately?
I can't remember.
Are we talking hundreds?
No, not hundreds.
Let me ask you this. When you are doing redactions, where would those be done at?
On the computer.
In your office?
Yes.
Okay, and do you have a phone in that office?
Yes.
Were people allowed to call you during that time period that you're doing redactions?
Yes.
And if there was something that came up that was deemed important, could a supervisor or another employee interrupt you and ask you to assist them in this other project?
Yes.
And how often would that happen? Was that daily?
No, not daily.
Was there ever a time where you just sat down and said, okay, for the next 5 hours, I'm just gonna handle this public records request and do the redactions?
Yes.
And no phone calls or anything like that?
We didn't get many phone calls from public records at all. Time period when I was there, most of the times from emails or US mail.
Did you ever complain about having to handle too many public records requests in a particular week?
I don't remember.
What would be too many in 1 week for a person like yourself or anybody else in public records to handle?
Maybe 50 in a week. It depends on how extensive the request is, though.
And what would be a comfortable number for you to be able to handle per week?
If they're short, basic
Yes.
Requests, 50 or 75, I'm thinking, but just depends on how many documents you have to gather up or what's required. It depends on what they're asking for. Some things, if we could pull ourselves, but if we have to go out to other departments, it depends on their time frame. When they be able to get the records back to us.
Now, did you ever get any type of anonymous emails making requests for public records?
Yes,
How was that handled?
the same way.
Was there ever any attempts to locate the individual or find out their identity?
No.
Now, this new system, do you have any training in it? Do you know anything about it?
I was basically introduced to the system, but I left before it went live.
Were you ever told that it would track the IP address of where the request came from?
No.
What kind of training did they give you as well as the other people in the public records department from 2013 till you left that department in, I think you said 2016? 17? What kind of training on the Sunshine Law, public records law here in Florida were y'all given?
We went to classes, seminars. Sometimes they'd be 3 or 4 days long, where they would come from the state.
Were those held on site in your department or were they held off site?
On site. I remember going to Tampa also over the years.
And how many hours training did you say do you believe you had while you were in public records per year?
For those type of seminars?
Yes.
Let's see. I actually don't know.
That's okay. If somebody requested the actual sheriff's emails with regards to a particular individual or a particular issue, were those requests handled differently?
Yes.
Okay, walk me through that process.
Well, it will get sent to the supervisor, and from there, she will handle it.
So then the supervisor will handle those, you don't handle those, is that accurate?
Right.
And were you ever involved in the supervisor handling those? Do you know what they would do exactly?
Objective form?
You can answer the
No.
question. Is there a way you could identify a record and whether it had already been redacted when somebody makes a request? Would you like me to give you an example?
Yes.
For instance, if I asked for an internal affairs file that was closed and the media had already requested it and it was already provided to the media, so it had been redacted, is there a way you could identify that that actual redaction occurred?
It would state on the document that it was redacted.
And if it's redacted, how would you do the estimate for billing?
If it had already been given out to the media for free and someone else asked for it, we would give it to that person for free.
Was there ever a time that you had handled a request where no response was made to the requester?
Yes.
And why would that be?
Various reasons. Depends on what the request was.
Like, give me an example in your experience.
Human error.
Anything else?
No.
Did you ever get disciplined for human error, or did anybody else in the department?
Yes, I did.
Okay, what did you get disciplined for?
Not responded to a request.
Okay, and when was that?
Last year, sometime last year. I think it was February.
And who made the request?
Mr. McLean's.
And which request was that? That
I
was
don't
not
know.
handled?
I don't know which request.
Did they put that in your personnel file?
I don't know.
What kind of discipline did they give you?
Got suspended 3 days. And I can't remember what else. I put that behind me.
And do you recall exactly what happened, why there was no response given?
Like I say, human error. I was working on a lot of other requests at the time, and I was overwhelmed with a lot of other requests. Not only his, but I was also doing subpoenas and other requests.
Was there some sort of, I want to call it a tickler, where if you send it to the supervisor or the box, there was some sort of program that would alert you after so much time?
At that time, no.
After you left, did they implement that?
That's, I think, what Gov does, the Gov Q&A.
How many responses did you fail to do for Mr. McLinnis's requests?
I don't know.
Was it just one or was it multiple?
It was more than one. I don't remember how many though.
Did it have to do with the substance of this lawsuit?
I don't know.
Objective form.
You can answer that, I'm sorry.
I don't know. I don't know what the lawsuit.
Was there ever any discussion in your department, and I'm not talking with legal, but about the lawsuit that Mr. McLinnis filed?
Not with me.
Did you ever hear anything?
No.
Were you given particular time limits under the policies and procedures or directives or memos with regards to handling public records requests?
No, it's not a time limit, it's a reasonable amount of time.
And what was your understanding in your department was a reasonable amount of time?
About 3 weeks. Depends on what the request is though, but normally around about 3 weeks or less.
Was there ever any discussion Let me start over. Do you recall Mr. McLinnis making a public records request with regards to the Stingray device that the sheriff's office allegedly had at that time?
It sounds familiar.
Do you know what the Stingray is?
No.
It's a device that captures cell phone calls and other information. It's a
Objective form.
surveillance technique.
Okay.
Does that ring a bell?
Like I say, it sounds, I remember seeing the word stingray, but I don't know what it is.
Did you recall getting that request?
It
From Ms.
sounds familiar.
What would you have done with that request if you remember?
The same as doing acknowledgement and setting up the files and sending out a request to trying to find out where to locate those records.
On the requests that you were disciplined on with regards to Mr. McLinnis, were those requests that were sent to the box or a supervisor, or were they never even sent to the box or the supervisor?
As far as I know, yeah, they was sent to, the boss and supervisor.
And were those requests then kicked back to you to handle, or no?
Yes.
Now for the ACES, for the reports, how did you have access to that? What would you do to get into that system?
Log on.
Would there ever be any records you would not have access to in ACES where you'd have to go to a supervisor, meaning they're in there but you're not allowed to look at them?
Yes.
And what would you do in a case like that?
It depends on what they're requesting, 'cause if it's an open case, we don't go into it, or if it's narcotics, undercover work, we don't go into those files.
Do you recall Mr. McLinnis using his own numbering system at one point with his public records requests?
Yes,
What were you instructed and by whom with regards to his numbering system in your department?
I don't understand that question.
Were you told to disregard his numbering system?
No,
Okay, so what would you do? Would you respond to him with his numbering system?
his request will be attached to, the acknowledgement.
Was there any issue or any problem with Mr. McLinnis numbering his requests that you're aware of with your department?
Yes,
Okay, what was the problem?
sometimes they have the same number and there'll be different requests.
And who alerted you to that?
I could see it myself.
Okay, and what did you do in response to that?
Nothing I could do. That's how he assigned it. That's his number.
Did anybody in your department ever talk to you specifically about his numbering system? Were you ever instructed to handle his requests differently at any point in time? Meaning Mr. McGlinnis.
Object the form.
You can answer the question.
The same procedures, you know, do the acknowledgements, set up the files, gather the documents.
Did you ever take out his numbering system when responding to his requests?
His number and his email will be attached. I didn't delete his numbering system. He'll be attached to, I respond to him from his email.
Who taught you how to invoice the estimates?
Supervisor at the time. Right.
What would be the normal time you would spend invoicing the estimates?
Depends on the request. It's not a set time, it just depends on each individual request.
So if he's asking for, if Mr. McClinch, for example, is asking for an internal affairs file that has 1,000 pages, would you just have to call up internal affairs and ask them how many pages it is?
Usually, it's all through email.
Okay, so you, go ahead, I'm sorry.
She will send us an email, we will respond, she will send us an email about how many pages, and then we'll go from using our guidelines.
So if her response, your supervisor, or excuse me, the IA individual, internal affairs, would say it's 1,000 pages and email you back, what would you then do with that email? Walk me through that so I have a better understanding.
Well, I would calculate, using our guidelines, 100 page per hour. And also, if they wanted the records through email, or either through a CD, we'll calculate, you know, the cost of the CD, but if through email, I think if I remember correctly, 1,000 pages was too much to email. I think that will have to be on CD,
Okay.
yeah.
So what would the average time be that you would spend from start to finish on an estimate? Meaning you get the request, you send the email out to whatever department, and then you do the estimate.
Well, it depends on what, if the specialists are from IA, if they're able to, you know, respond back, you know, right away or either a day or so. Once we get the number, you know, it takes a couple of minutes just to, you know, calculate that and write up the email or either the call sheet and send it to the requester.
And
It's
so
just an estimate.
on average, how much time would one take you? And I know that's a little generic, but
Okay, I'll on average, I say 30 minutes.
now, if an individual makes a request and they get the estimate from you and they figure it's not worth their while, what they're asking for and what the charge is, what happens to that request?
It stays in the file.
And is there a time period where it dissolves?
No. I mean, we'll close out the case. We'll close out the request if they have not sent in the request for deposit. At the time there wasn't, but now I think it's like 30 days they have in order to respond. If not, we will send a letter saying that that case or that request is closed.
In general, what percentage of requests would the public or media, whoever it may be, send you requests, you send them estimates, and they never get paid?
Object the
What-
form.
Go ahead, ma'am.
The media is different.
Because theirs was free?
Right.
Okay, let's just talk about the public. Do you have any sort of knowledge what percentage of requests were made by requesters where they did not pay for it because it wasn't worth their money or time, they figured.
No, I don't know the percentage.
Did it happen often?
Most people don't request a whole lot. They're just requesting just things that pertain to them, so it's not a whole lot.
So when you were in public records, if I made a request and I thought it was excessive and I decided I'm not gonna buy it, if I make a second request, will you also send me an invoice as to that second request? An estimate?
You mean after we have closed out the first one?
Yes.
Is it the same request?
No, a different
Oh,
request.
different one? Yeah, we'll do the same procedure.
And if I then go ahead and pay the estimate on my second request, will you provide me those documents?
Yes,
Or
it's
do,
procedure.
or do I have to pay the first estimate where I decided I don't want them?
It depends on you gotta, how they closed the request out. Was it closed or was it left open?
And who determines whether it's closed or left open?
That would probably be up to the supervisor.
So if I do two public records requests, the first one I don't pay for because I think it's excessive for what I'm asking, and it's left open, which is an internal mechanism with your department, right?
It would be in the file, just that the case is still open.
Okay, and then I do a second public records request, and I feel that that one's reasonable, and I pay you.
Right.
Will you give me those records, or will you hold them until I pay that first estimate that I decided I didn't want?
Object to form.
You can answer the question.
They will be provided to you.
Even though I never paid the first request estimate?
This is a different request, right?
Yes.
Okay, different request.
And so I will get those records.
Yes.
Was there ever a policy in place during your tenure with the public records where if somebody made multiple requests and didn't pay for those estimates, which again are just estimates, that they wouldn't provide me any further records or estimates?
You asking if there's a policy?
Yes.
I don't know if there's a policy or not about that.
Do you know if that occurred to Mr. McLinnis,
That what occurred?
where he made multiple requests that he did not pay, made a future request, and was told that he would not be able to obtain those records until he paid the previous requests in the past?
I don't know if he was told that. I don't know.
Have you ever, in your tenure with the Public Records Department, heard of that happening to anybody?
No,
Did you ever do that to anybody?
no.
Who would make that decision to do that? Would it be a supervisor?
Yes, it would, yeah, it wouldn't be a specialist. It would be someone over us.
And were there any guidelines you're aware of where they're allowed to do that in the department?
Not that I'm aware of.
Now, you said the portal, before it was implemented, you didn't have anything to do with it? I mean, you weren't involved in it at that time?
The portal?
Yes. That sieve that you
The
discussed?
Gov, no.
Were you trained on it?
I was starting to get training.
Do you recall anything about people only allowed to download a document so many times before they would not be allowed to have access to it again?
No.
For billing, when you're in the PRR department, the public records, when would you determine, okay, I'm gonna start the billing process? Meaning you've received a request, you've sent it to the supervisor, it comes back to you. When do you say, all right, that first 15 minutes, or at one point was an hour, when will you determine, all right, we're gonna start the billing process?
At the time after the first hour is up, then the time will get calculated as you work on the project.
So if I sent you an email with a public records request, you opening it and reading it, would the time start then?
No,
Okay, what point would it start?
depends on what the request is.
Would it be the research time?
Yeah, that is included.
Did you ever have to do email research, meaning somebody's requesting, a requester is requesting emails from a particular deputy?
Yes.
And how would you do those?
Well, at the time, we could pull the emails ourselves, but then they changed it where only our IT department pulled those emails.
When you pulled the emails, how would you pull them? What would you look for? Did you do a search? Was there a program?
Yeah, through our email program, Outlook. I don't remember each step though, because it's several steps that you have to do.
Was it difficult or pretty easy to pull emails that were requested?
It depends on what the request is saying, asking for. Because you gotta do a search engine for each, whatever they're requesting.
Did you ever bundle invoices together? And if you don't understand, I can explain.
Yeah, you gotta explain it.
If I did over a period of a month, 30 email public records requests, would you bundle the total amount for every one of those requests that I would have to pay as an estimate, or would you do them individually?
We did it both ways.
Okay, when would you do it individually versus bundling?
For a time frame, we did it by week. Say we got like 30, 50 requests in, and we'll do the time frame for each request for that week and calculate it. But then later, I think a year or so later, we start doing it individually.
And do you know why the policy changed to do it individually?
I'm not sure it was a policy, just a procedure that we did in public records.
Okay, and who implemented that procedure that you could bundle the bills?
It was the supervisor at the time.
Do you know who that is, or was?
At the time, it was Molly and Tara.
Is Tara still in the public records department?
She never was in public records.
What was she in?
Records.
Does she have involvement with the billing still?
Not with public records that I know of.
But she was involved in the billing and the public records back when you were in public records?
Partially because there was a time frame where public record was under records.
Do
And
you know when that time frame was? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I think it was 2012, 2013, somewhere in there. Could be earlier.
When they changed it back to, or when they changed it to individual billing estimates, were you told why that occurred?
Well, actually, at the time, I did it because I told my supervisor at the time that was too confusing for me to bundle, or not. I didn't say the word bundle. It was too confusing to do it by the weeks.
By combining them?
Right. And I asked her, could I do it individually so I can keep better track of the request?
Let me ask you this, if I had made 5 public records requests in 1 week and you received all of them, and the amounts were bundled, the estimates, in one amount, how could I determine whether I wanted to purchase certain ones without knowing what each one actually costs?
Objective form.
You can go ahead and answer that.
Well, you would have to, if it was done that way, you have to say, I want the cost for estimate number 1 only. Or estimate number, or public records request number 1 or number 2.
Do you recall while you're in public records during your time whether Mr. McLinnis was the only individual who had his bills bundled, or were there other people that you dealt with?
With me, he was the only one.
With the bundling?
by the weeks at the time. I mean, we had other specialists. I'm not sure, you know, what they had on their plate and how they handle their requests. I
And
don't speak for myself.
did somebody instruct you to do it that way with Mr. McGlinnis at that time?
Yes, my supervisors at the time,
Okay, who-
Molly and Tara.
okay, did you ask them why?
No,
Did you ever tell Molly or Tara, look, this is confusing for me? Like,
not at the time.
okay, when did you tell them you're confused about it?
Well, at that time, Molly had left the sheriff's office, and Tara was no longer my supervisor. I informed. It was Jen. She was the supervisor at the time, but she had went on vacation, and our attorney Danielle was filling in for her, and I told Danielle that's easier for me if I separate them. And I asked her, and she said that would be okay.
Do you know if anybody else in public records was bundling the billing?
I don't know what their procedure were. I can only speak to myself, you know, what I was doing.
Who else was in public records with you as a specialist like yourself at that time?
Kim Preston, Deanna Hazatone, Carrie Scott. It's a new lady came in, I forgot her name. She's new.
Are those individuals still in public records?
I think Kim and Deanna is still there. I'm not sure about the other ones. Carrie Scott, she's gone. Oh, see, there's Sabrina. Sabrina also, she was there, but she works at the jail now.
Okay, I'm gonna take a 5-minute break. Let me turn this off.